So Mary, it's probably asking you to okay that.
Oh. Someone keeps getting their ironweed. Oh, I actually have a picture of my ironweed, my second year ironweed in my presentation. I'm so pleased with its biomass that I threw it in.
We're growing the.
Apparently, that's like one of the
I
only
forget
plants
which,
of mine that the rabbits haven't eaten. So that's interesting. Sue is having the opposite problem.
We're growing that thin-leafed ironweed. I forget what the species is, but it's a little tighter and more dense. I'll have to share one with you, Mary, and you can try it out.
I think that's what I have, but it's like 12 feet tall. It has big serrated leaves.
Yeah, this one stays pretty tight, like 2.5 to 3 feet.
Okay, you guys are going to be shocked.
Yeah.
Because I had no idea what it was. I just planted it. You know when you come back from the garden center and you bought a ton of stuff? At least me, I just get excited and start like kind of putting it in there. And I know this one said, 8 feet or something. And I said, oh no, it can't possibly be that big. But it's like up the rain gutter and under the roof of my garage. It's hilarious. Read the label, Mary.
Well, welcome everybody. It's just a little after 1, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Denise Ellsworth with the OSU Department of Entomology, and I'm excited to have Mary Gardiner with us today, who many of you have met before. She has coordinated a lot of different citizen science projects. Maybe you helped with the Buckeye Lady Beetle Blitz years ago, or you're working with Dandelion Detectives this summer. She's also an author of a book on garden bugs, Good Garden Bugs, has done a lot of research, extensive research up in Cleveland on vacant lots that many of you have heard about, looking at creating, increasing biodiversity in those urban situations. And just a really great speaker, high in demand, and we're lucky to have her here today. She's got a busy summer grant writing, but we were able to get on her calendar to talk about going beyond bees, supporting other good garden bugs at home. So Mary, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Denise. Thank you for inviting me to speak to your group. What we're going to do, since I have to minimize everyone's pictures to be able to see the slideshow, if you think of questions during the presentation, go ahead and add those to the chat. And then after the presentation, we'll go through the chat. And anything that hasn't been answered by the presentation, I'll go ahead and answer at that point. I look forward to telling you about my favorite subjects. So all of my education, my master's and my PhD focused on predators. I do a lot of work with bees. Of course, we're all concerned about our bees, but I'm excited to share a little bit with you about some of these other insects that we can look for and try to encourage in our home landscape today. Get my computer. There we go. So a lot of you I already know, and you know me, but I just always like to give a little bit of background about myself and my program when I do these webinars, so you have a sense of what I do. I'm a professor of entomology, and the majority of my time I spend doing research. So as Denise mentioned, grant writing, conducting research, writing papers, and working with graduate students is about 85% of my job. We study the ecology of urban green spaces, so everything from residential yards to parklands to vacant lots. And we're interested in how to design and manage these to support biodiversity, human well-being, and really increase ecosystem services across the board. We're also we consider a lot of variables when we do our work, including the landscape surrounding a site. How does that influence insects and people, and also pollution in the landscape, which is an important thing to think about in cities. So I have research programs kind of looking at those types of topics. As I said, I get to work with a lot of grad students. This is the students and postdocs who've come through my lab in the last couple of years, who've all worked in the city of Cleveland. I also do programs like this and other extension activities, as Denise mentioned, including 4-H, Master Gardener programming, and citizen science. And I teach. If you were on the Zoom when we were first getting hooked up, I was talking about getting ready for fall. I'll be teaching insect ecology at the graduate level remotely this fall. I also teach a grant writing class and a presentation skills class for graduate students and upper level undergraduates. But today we're going to be talking about beneficial insects. And so I'm going to start off by talking about some of the benefits that insects provide to us in our home landscape. So as many of you know, insects provide many different ecosystem services. Of course, we have pollinators. So here we have a honeybee absolutely coated with pollen grains and a pollinating fly called a hoverfly. We also have insects that provide natural pest control, which is also called biological control. So here are two insects killing an aphid. One is a predator eating the aphid. This is a parasitoid wasp injecting an egg that will hatch and eat the aphid, and we'll talk about both of those cases. Insects are food for wildlife. Sometimes when we're gardening for bees or other insects, we forget about other trophic levels and the connections there, but of course, insects are important food. And of course, aesthetically and conservation-wise, insects are really important components of wider biodiversity. They're one of the most biodiverse groups. They are incredibly diverse in their habits, in their size, in their roles within the environment. And so even those that do not provide us with a direct service, of course, are important to conserve in their own right as well. And they add so much beauty and interest to our surroundings, which is really important, many feel, including myself, for our own well-being when we're in our home landscape. So in today's talk, of all of these different insects, we're going to focus in on natural enemies. And natural enemies is a word used to describe insects that feed on insect pests in the garden. And we're going to talk first about how to identify some of the main groups of these natural enemies, and then also to talk about how to transform our landscapes to be more friendly to them. What can we do to support their abundance? So I'm going to go through first and talk about predators. The majority of natural enemies that we're going to notice in the environment are predatory. Our parasitoids are the other group that I'll get to at the end of the seminar, and many of those are incredibly tiny. So it's not that they're not there, we just may not notice them, but you're certainly going to notice predatory insects. Predatory insects actively hunt for their own prey. So all life stages are going to look for their own food resource. Most of them are generalists, which means they seek out any sort of prey that they're able to catch and consume. They don't target one specific type of insect. And within the group of predators, they use many different hunting strategies. So some are visual hunters, and you can see, some predatory insects have very large eyes, but some are tactile hunters. For instance, these larvae do not have eyes. They rely on vibrations from their prey to be able to sense them. Other insects might use odor cues, etc. So there's a lot of different hunting strategies. Of course, and there's also insects that will sit and wait and ambush their prey, and others that will run after and catch it. So many of these factors are going to influence what type of resources the predators might need to be able to be successful in our garden controlling pests. So we're going to go through some major groups of predators, and I'm going to start off with the mantids. Most people are familiar with mantids in general, but may not realize that there are some different species of mantids within Ohio. So all mantids are predatory, and they will consume almost anything that they can catch. Mantids have one generation per year, so they overwinter in their egg stage, and early in the summer you will find little tiny nymphs of mantids that look like adults, but they're very small and lack wings. And over the summer, they molt and grow into the adult stage. And that's why people really start noticing mantids late in the summer, because the adults are present. Then they will mate, lay an egg case that will overwinter, and the whole cycle will start again. So all three species that we have in the state, and this goes for the region too. I know we have some people on the Zoom from surrounding states, same species. So we have three. Interestingly, you may not know that two of these were introduced way back in the 1800s when people started to recognize the importance of insects for biological pest control. two mantids were introduced. The Chinese mantid, which is a large mantid about 7 inches long with a green stripe along its wing. The body of this mantid can be either green or brown, but this stripe is always very vibrant and visible. And the European mantid, which is a little bit smaller at 5 inches and has these characteristic eye spots on the inside of its front legs. Both of these were introduced for biological control purposes. They are not super effective biological control agents if you are farming a field and need effective pest control, things like aphids, mites, and scales, because mantids are visual hunters. They bigger things like flies, bees, etc. They're very generalist. They do not tend to target very small prey that occur in high numbers, but nonetheless, they are beneficial predators of insects and also fun to find in the garden. We do have one species of native mantid in Ohio called the Carolina mantid. This is a female. On the female, the wings do not cover the whole abdomen, and both the males and females have this black spot on their wing, which is big enough to see if you capture one of these, and that is the native species. Next, we're going to talk about a large group called the Hamikdara, or true bugs. True bugs are unique in that they have a different type of mouth part than many predators. So many predators, let me just go back to the mantid. You can see clearly here in this picture, this guy is cleaning his tarsi with his chewing mouth parts. So they have chewing mandibles that they're able to grind up their prey. True bugs, including this thread-legged bug, have a piercing sucking beak. So what this insect does is it has raptorial front legs. It will grab its prey, and then it will inject a venom into its prey with this beak, which will paralyze the prey, and then it will ingest the liquid contents of the prey, leaving a raisin-like carcass behind. There are many different species and families of true bugs, and so I'm going to show a few different ones. One of the coolest ones I think are thread-legged bugs. Here's one being held by a person, and you can see it's very angry. This is its beak here, ready to bite. And you can see in the foreground its raptorial front legs. This is what one looks like in nature. They really look a lot like a walking stick, but they hold that first pair of raptorial front legs out in front of them. And so you can see those here. And here is one eating where its pierced, looks like a saucid, and it's holding it and eating it. Our next group of true bugs are the assassin bugs. There are many different species of assassin bugs. These are a little bit more robust. They have very large raptorial front legs, and they're called assassins because they hide in wait. And when the prey comes close, they reach out and grab it and eat it. And this particular scary looking one is sitting on a flower, and you can see the mimicry. This is sitting on a daisy, and it's white and yellow. So very good camouflage. This is one of the largest insects that we have around that are predatory. This is a wheel bug. This was actually a laboratory pet of ours a couple years ago. They're more than an inch long as adults. You can see the raptorial beak here. Do not pick up a wheel bug because the bite of the wheel bug is very unpleasant. I can personally attest. You do not want to be bit by one of these guys. They are active nocturnally, so during the day, sometimes you find them on the foundation of the house or different places around the garden. This is the assassin bug, and this is its immature stage, or I'm sorry, the masked hunter assassin bug. It's called the masked hunter because the larvae, or the nymph stage here, covers itself in debris, plant material, soil, etc. This is the adult of that same insect, consuming an earwig, shiny black, leathery wings. These are another few different true bug families. The first are the Anthracouridae, or the minute pirate bugs. These are one of the most common insects you're going to have in a vegetable garden. They eat aphids. They're extremely common. They're very important predators, but they're very small, so people often overlook them. The immature stage of the minute pirate bug looks like a tiny mite. It's about the size of a mite, less than a quarter or an eighth, less than 1/8 of an inch, maybe even a 1/16 of an inch in length. This is the adult stage. The adult stage is maybe 1/8 of an inch in total length, and it has this checkerboard wing pattern. And these are also going to have that piercing, sucking beak, these little guys. This is the Damsel Bug. The Damsel Bug is about 1/4 of an inch in length. You can see its raptorial front legs and its piercing beak going into a flower. All of these true bugs rely on pollen and nectar as a sugar source in between protein meals. And so I'll show at the end some strategies to enhance their abundance. This last one I threw in because certainly now with the invasive stink bug, I'm blanking on its name, BMSB, brown marmorated stink bug. With the brown marmorated stink bug, certainly people do not have a good view of stink bugs necessarily, but there are a few predatory stink bugs out there, and one of them is this 2-spotted stink bug. This is an interesting one because although most of these natural enemies will feed on anything that they can find, as I said, even though these specialize on aphids, they'll eat little caterpillars, scales, thrips, etc. The 2-spotted stink bug really likes to eat Colorado potato beetle larvae, and it's somewhat of a specialist. It will eat other beetle larvae, but it's especially important if you grow white potatoes and you have Colorado potato beetle. So if you see this stink bug, you don't have a second pest on your potatoes. It's actually a beneficial. And it's characterized by those bright yellow to orange markings that it has on its body. I also wanted to include some biodiversity that you might find in a water feature. I started water gardening this year and have really been enjoying it, and have started to see some colonization by different insects in my water feature. And so if some of you have these at home, you may also notice some predatory insects. These are great because not only will they eat mosquito larvae, but they'll eat other pests that might colonize your aquatic plants. So there's quite a few different predators. Now these are all true bug predators, even though some of them look like beetles. These are all going to have that piercing beak. So again, you don't want to pick these up necessarily, but they're cool to look at. So two that are about 1/2 of an inch long are the back swimmer and the water boatman. These look very similar. They both have really big eyes. The back swimmer swims upside down. The water boatman swims right side up. Many people are probably familiar with the water strider. It kind of looks like a spider floating on the water, but it's a true bug. I love these. This is the creeping water bug. These are found in emergent vegetation on the edges of a water feature. And then these two are both really found deeper in the water. Water scorpions look a lot like water striders, but they're under the water. They really like to hang out in sort of muck and plant material that's underwater. They're probably about 1.5 inches. These are big insects. And then the big guy is the giant water bug. These come to lights at night, and that's usually where I see them. Even in the city, every once in a while under a street light, you can find a giant water bug. They're huge. They're 2 inches or more in length. They're also called the toe biter, and that should be an indication, again, not to pick up a giant water bug if you find one. I have good luck. I've also been bit by this. It is also very unpleasant. And here's a drawing. This is from my book that Denise mentioned, just kind of showing that if you have a water feature, if you can add a lot of elements to it, like different depths, vegetation that's both coming from the bottom of the feature up to the top, and also some emergent vegetation that's above the water, that's going to provide more habitat for all these different insects. For instance, we know that water striders like to be out in the surface water, but things like water boatmen, they like to be able to swim down into deep habitats looking for prey, whereas creeping water bugs, they really only want to be along the shore on emergent vegetation. So the more diversity of habitat you provide in the pond, the more types of these insects you might attract to the pond. And all of these adults can fly, and that's how they would originally colonize. So just like our terrestrial environment, we need to diversify our aquatic one as well. And this doesn't need to be as difficult, I think, as this image. I'll show you a very small water feature that I have that I've been trying to attract these insects to. So our next group, moving back out of the water and onto the land, are the lacewings. Lacewings are Neuroptera, another order, a pretty small order compared to the true bugs, but some really cool insects in this group. The most common species that you're likely to encounter are species of green lacewings, Chrysophidae, this insect here. Green lacewings are approximately an inch in length. They have long, straight antennae and beautiful net-veined wings, which is how they get their name. They are this bright green in real life, and these are attracted to lights at night, which is when many people find them and email them to me saying, what in the heck is this? This is the life cycle of the green lacewing. It has an egg stage. The egg hatches into this larva, which is shown here. The larva feeds on aphids primarily. It will consume hundreds of aphids to reach its adult stage. And then here is the adult. Now, one interesting thing about the larvae is that some species are considered naked, like this individual, and some are debris carrying. So here we have the same larvae, but it has a giant ball of debris that consists of its prey, plant fuzz, leaf material, and dirt that it uses as a deterrent to predators, to bird predators. So it hides under this debris pile to conceal itself, which is very cool. So these are kind of fun to look for too. When you see a moving debris pile, it's a good indication that that's what's there. There are other types of Neuroptera that you might find in the garden too. Some of you that live near Lake Erie may encounter antlions or along the rivers in Ohio. Antlions are also neuropterans. If you look, now that you know that lacewings are neuropterans, you look at an adult antlion and you can see some similarities: long and slender body, big eyes, these beautiful net vein wings, and some similarities among the types of larvae, right? So also big predatory jaws, this long kind of alligator-like body, just like the lacewings. Antlions, of course, eat ants. They do eat other kinds of prey that fall within their pits. Not all antlions make pits, but the ones that you might be most likely to see the larvae would be when you see these little sandy pits together. There's a good indication that these are antlions. And the adults are pretty big. They're about the size of a damselfly, so they're kind of fun to see. I see those less frequently than I happen to find the larvae. All right, so beetles. So 60% of insects are beetles. So we're not going to go over all the beetles, but I'm going to talk about a couple of the real powerhouses in the biological control world that basically every PhD entomologist studies these. And I've studied both of these for projects over the years. And this first group are called the ground beetles. They're a tremendously diverse group of beetles that attack all sorts of different important prey, everything from slugs to aphids to caterpillars, gypsy moth. There's a ground beetle that eats almost every kind of prey. Some species also eat weed seeds, so very diverse group. They're called ground beetles because the majority of species spend most of their time on the ground. Most of these will not climb, but obviously there are some, such as this species, that will climb trees and other vegetation. Ground beetles are typically either black and shiny with striated wing covers, or metallic. So you can see there's a lot of metallic species here. They eat all sorts of prey as an adult and as a larva, so they're predatory throughout their life cycle. This is the larva. So these are usually found when you're weeding or mulching or digging in the soil. They don't go too far down in the soil, but they're in sort of the upper surface. This particular one is eating a snail. There are many ground beetle species that specialize on snails and slugs, but there are other species that eat all kinds of other prey. And the other group, this is one of my favorites, the lady beetles, also known as ladybugs or ladybirds by different people. We have a lot of ladybugs in Ohio. Unfortunately, some of our fauna of ladybugs has become exceedingly rare. Of our aphid-feeding lady beetles, the two species that we have that remain common are this polished lady beetle and this pink lady beetle, which you are very likely to see in your garden. I've seen both of these, several of these already this summer in my yard. Lady beetles, the adults are predatory. These species eat aphids. Other species eat scales. Some species eat mealybugs. But within a species, they tend to focus on one kind of prey. So if it's an aphid feeding species, you'll have it if you have aphids. So if you have milkweed and you have milkweed aphids, take a look for ladybugs out in the garden. All ladybugs have orange eggs that are laid in groups, and they will hatch into an alligator-like larva that looks a little bit like a lacewing larva. Here's an example of the larva. The larva usually has black and bright patterns. The patterns might be orange or red or even yellow. The adults look different among species. So many species, of course, are red, like we think of ladybugs, but some are more pinkish and some are even black with light colored spots. This is a twice-stabbed ladybug. It eats scale insects and is found in trees. We also have both native and non-native ladybugs. So I mentioned that these are our common native ladybugs that remain in Ohio. This is the multicolored Asian ladybug. It is the most common ladybug you're likely to find. It was introduced from China, and it has displaced some of our native species. The multicolored Asian ladybug varies a lot between individuals. Some of them lack spots like this one. Some of them, like this is the same species, will have spots, and this is its larva here next to it. These are also larger than our ladybugs in size. There are also predatory beetles in water features, just like there are predatory true bugs in water features. Two of the most common and fun ones to watch for are the Predacious diving beetle. This is its adults. The Predacious diving beetle does exactly what it says. It will come to the surface, but it will dive deep into a water feature looking for prey. The larvae live in mud and sediments at the base of streams and rivers, and at the edges of small lakes too in some cases. You can see it's also predatory based on these jaws alone. You can tell that. This is the Whirligig Beetle. It gets its name because in groups they will swim kind of in circles. And one of the really cool things about this beetle is it can hunt both above and below the surface of the water. So it has four large eyes. Two are pointed up above it and two below it. So a very effective hunter. Excuse me, I need some water, and then I'll continue on with flies. So next are flies. Flies can be very annoying, and some species like house flies or deer flies, and we tend to not think of flies as having much value, but actually there are a lot of important flies in the environment. One of my favorite flies are the hoverflies, or bee flies, or syrphid flies are all common names for this group. Here are two examples. You can see that these mimic bees and wasps. So some of them, this is such a nice honeybee mimic here. Some of them are fuzzy and kind of look like bees. Some are much more wasp-like. These are really neat, not only because they're beautiful, but because they are both pollinators and predators. So the adult stages visit flowers and act as pollinators of flowers. And sometimes you might confuse them as a bee or wasp. And one indicator that they're flies, if you take a look at the eyes, they have huge eyes. And most flies have big eyes. And they have very short little fuzzy antennae. And so if you see that, they also have only two wings. So bees and wasps are going to have four, two on each side, and these only have one on each side. In addition to pollinating, the female adults will go around and look for aphid populations, and they will lay eggs within the aphids. And these slug-like maggots will hatch, and they will begin feeding on the aphids. These are eyeless. They find the aphids by tapping on the leaves and trying to feel the aphids near them. So that's why it's important that the adults lay their larvae in the right place. They also are thought to use some vibrational cues from the prey themselves. These have both been really hungry. You can see all of these little remains are dead aphids that are stuck to this larvae and over here on the leaf. Here are some other cool predatory flies, robber flies. This is a bee mimic robber fly. Robber flies are predatory hunters that hunt on the wing, so they actually capture prey as they're flying around. Some are really hairy like this one. Here is a smooth robber fly. You can see that they have this sharp mouth part that they use to stab their prey. Very effective flyers. Another group of predatory flies are the predatory midges. This is one where you're very unlikely to notice the adults. The adults are really small, they're nondescript, they sort of look like any old little midge or biting mosquito. But what is really cool about them is they are also an aphid predator, and like the syrphids, they have this active maggot that will go around consuming aphids. But what's really neat, I think, is that the larvae are also bright neon orange. So just to add a little interest to that group. So here are some larvae in an aphid patch, and you can see they have a vibrant, really interesting color. Another cool thing about their life history, the adults of this fly mate in spider webs. And so the females will hang on the spider webs and emit a pheromone. And that's what this one's doing. If you look very closely, this is a thread of a spider web. It's waiting for a mate. They will mate in the spider web, and then the female will seek these aphid patches to lay the egg. Next, we're going to talk about wasps, and I want to focus both on solitary and social wasps. Many people think about wasps as living in a colony and being a threat to people, but there are also many docile wasps which act as predators of garden pests that are not a threat to us and really just add beauty and interest to our yards. Some examples of this are the Mud Dauber. The Mud Dauber constructs a mud-like nest that it provisions with insects. It lays an egg in there, its eggs hatch, the larvae feed on the insects and then emerge as adults. It collects water and mud from the landscape to make its nest. And here you can see this female has a big mouthful of mud that she's using to make her nest. I actually have one of these I've been watching outside my back door. It now has about 10 cells. So it's been active, going around my yard, collecting mud, taking it back all day long, all these trips. So if I get sick of grant writing, Tom, I will go out there and watch the Mud Dauber, but I need to focus, unfortunately. There are a lot of these wasps that will burrow under the soil to make their nest. So here is an example of a burrow. Kind of looks like an anthill, but the hole is larger. And this is a spider wasp, and you can see it has paralyzed this large spider, and it's dragging it along. It will take it down in that hole, and then its egg will hatch and eat the spider and mature into a spider wasp. This one looks black in my slide. They're actually metallic, and so you may have seen these. They're in the family of Pompilidae. They flick their wings when they're at rest. They do this really weird behavior, and you'll notice this if you see one land. This is a similar one. This is the Cutworm Wasp, similar looking wasp, but instead of attacking spiders, it attacks cutworms. And here you can see this female has captured one. Again, she will drag that to an underground nest. Here we have a flower wasp. This is a very large, more than an inch in length wasp. It has these bright bands. Some of the species have spots, but they're typically all a black hairy wasp with dark metallic wings and bright colored spots. These are called flower wasps, of course, because they visit flowers, but they actually forage mostly in turf because they attack grubs like Japanese beetle and other spring beetles like June beetles and things like that. And the females will fly above the turf, and you'll see them pretty low. I've seen them in tree lawns and just my grass, and once they find a grub, they will fly down to the ground and dig it up and lay their egg on it. So they don't actually capture it and take it somewhere else. They just locate it. And it's really impressive to see something like this dig through the turf, down into the soil, and find these grubs. And a favorite among a lot of people are potter wasps. They make mud nests just like a Mud Dauber, but they're much more artistic about it. So Mud Dauber nests kind of are just, little cells. Potter wasps make these really cute round to oval shaped nests. What they do, they'll construct this entire nest, and then they'll leave a hole, and then they shove cutworms and inchworms and different types of caterpillars in the hole. And you can see that this female wasp is too big to fit in the hole. So once she gets enough caterpillars in there, she turns around and just puts her abdomen in there and lays her egg inside the pot with the larvae. And then she'll go and get more mud and seal it up and then go and make a new pot. So if you see one that's closed, it means that that one has larvae developing in it, eating caterpillars. And if it's open, the larvae have either hatched, and in that case, it kind of looks like it's falling apart a little bit. If it looks fresh, she's actively filling it. And then it's kind of interesting to wait and see what she might bring. So if you find one that's open, definitely hang out and see if you can catch her filling the pot. In addition to all of these solitary wasps, we have many species that make nests that are social, just like some bees are social. So I kind of like to separate these when I talk about them into paper wasps and others. Paper wasps make an open nest like this one. So you can see, if you can see into the nest, it's a paper wasp. If it's not concealed like this, so we have a few different paper wasps in the state. Our northern paper wasp is our native paper wasp, but we also have the European paper wasp. The European paper wasp looks like a yellow jacket, but instead of having black antennae as yellow jackets do, it has red antennae here. And so this would make a nest that looks like this, but it looks like a yellow jacket. The northern paper wasp, I think, and others have said this too, is less aggressive. And also when I find yellow jackets nesting somewhere I don't want them, like right by my door or in my fence, right by where I sit or something, they tend to be the European paper wasp. I don't know if it's just more associated with human development than the northern paper wasp, but typically when you have an issue with paper wasps, it's this invasive one. Also, there are many species of wasps that live within a nest like this. This nest can be above ground, but some yellow jackets also will make a paper nest down in the soil. This is our common native species, the common yellow jacket. This is one of our native hornets, which is a little bit larger, the bald-faced hornet. Our largest hornet is the European hornet. This is about 2 inches long, and it is also a European species. This one can be very aggressive, and so sometimes people will find these in their attic and have to call a pest control company to come because they're worried about them, you know, coming in vents and things like that. I've never really encountered the European hornet myself, but they are definitely present. Now, this year, of course, we've had a lot of concern about the murder hornets or the Asian hornets in Ohio, and we do not have the Asian hornet in Ohio, but I wanted to point out that the European hornet is actually a little bit larger than the Asian hornet, and so we've been getting a ton of photos of the European hornet that people have sent into the department asking if they found the murder hornet. And so if you go online, there's a lot of good resources to separate them, but basically the Asian hornet does have a red face, but it has a black top to its face, whereas this one has like a reddish full head, and it also has a much different body and abdomen than the Asian hornet. So if you think you find an Asian hornet, definitely there's some great online outreach keys to be able to separate them. So European hornet, reddish body, lots of yellow on the abdomen. This one, black body, not so much yellow on the abdomen, but it's hard when you just have one to be able to necessarily know for sure. Okay, so finally we're going to talk about spiders. Spiders are my favorite group of natural enemies. There are many, many different kinds of spiders. One of the most largest families are the Araneae, or the orb weavers. You probably have some orb weavers nesting in your garden now. There's many different types. I'd say kind of the first way that we would break them down is some of them have a very round orb-like abdomen, but some of them have spines. If you find an orb weaver and you aren't sure what it is, there are great online resources for these because they're really quite ornate and people like to photograph them. So that's kind of fun to be able to go through and track down which one you found. The most common one people send us is the common garden spider, which is actually this one. And these have one generation per year. So the reason that you find big ones of these in the fall is because that's when there's the adults out. So right now, you know, those same spiders are pretty small, medium size. By September, October, that's when you're going to see the adults. In addition to orb weavers, other common spiders in the garden include wolf spiders. Wolf spiders forage on the ground. They are large, they are kind of hairy and robust. They have pretty large central eyes. And one of the really cool things about them is that the females carry their egg sac on their abdomen. And so if you find a spider doing this, she will do this to protect the eggs. It's a wolf spider. They also very commonly have this light line or banding that goes down their cephalothorax, and then similar types of bands on their abdomen. You can see that band here on this guy as well, or female. So when the eggs hatch, they actually climb on, the little spiderlings climb onto the abdomen of the female, and they will ride on her until they take their first molt. Again, this reduces the amount of mortality the species will see from other predatory insects. Another one that I get a ton of emails about are fishing spiders. Fishing spiders are the biggest spiders that we can have in Ohio. I mean, with the legs, some of these guys are huge. If you have a small stream or water feature of some sort in your yard, or you live near water, you might see a fishing spider. They're called a fishing spider because they actually can hunt in the water in addition to on emergent vegetation. Some species will hang a leg in the water, and when an insect, or in some cases even a fish in some parts of the world, comes near, they grab it and consume it. Like the wolf spiders, fishing spiders also protect their eggs. So here's a female, and they actually carry their egg mass around in their mouth, and when they want to hunt, she'll set it down somewhere nearby, hunt. If she's going to move somewhere else, takes it to the next location and sets it down again. So they're also fun to watch if you happen to find one with eggs, just to see how they are able to move their eggs around. And finally, a couple more spiders. We've got the crab and jumping spiders. We've got 3 jumping spiders in this picture, here, here, and here. This one this is a monkey spider. I just threw it in because it's really cute. And you can see how big the front eyes are. But the 2 jumping spiders that you're likely to see most commonly in the state here are Phidippus, this one, and I don't know what the common name of this guy is. And then this is called the zebra spider. Phidippus have these really neat green metallic tertiary or mouth parts, and on the abdomen, they have a black abdomen with 3 white spots. And these are big spiders. They're called jumping spiders because they actually do jump to capture their prey, which really freaks out people. These are not a threat to people. The zebra spider, I find these a lot in and around my garden. Crab spiders are also a common garden spider. 2 sort of main groups of crab spiders. Some species are found on the ground and they kind of look like mulch to hide out in the mulch. Some species hunt in flowers, and they can actually change color to match the flowers. So here we have a yellow one inside this monkey flower, and it is exactly the same color as that monkey flower. It's really cool. Crab spiders, unlike jumping spiders, do not go after their prey. They're a sit and wait hunter. They have those really long legs, and they kind of sit there with their legs open. When something comes near, they close the legs and capture it. And finally, I said we were going to talk about some parasitoids. So our first parasitoid are flies. There is a large family of over 10,000 species across the world of tachinid fly parasitoids, and we have many species in Ohio. One of the most charismatic that you might notice is this feather-legged fly. It's called the feather-legged fly because it has these plates on its back leg. It also has a bright orange abdomen. It feeds on squash bugs. And so if you grow melons, pumpkins, cucumbers, squash bug is probably a bane of your gardening world. So what these guys do, the adult fly will land on the squash bug and lay eggs. One of those eggs will successfully burrow into the squash bug, eating it from the inside out and killing it. And then it will leave the squash bug and pupate in the soil. There is a similar thing going on with the tachinid that attacks Striped cucumber beetle, another major garden pest. So here is a cocoon of one of these flies bursting out of a dead cucumber beetle. This fly looks almost like a housefly. So if you see something that kind of looks like a housefly hanging out on your zucchini, squash, and pumpkins, it's probably looking for Colorado or looking for cucumber beetle. And this is another tachinid that attacks cutworms. Many of these flies have bristles and like thick hairs on them. And there are also many wasps that attack insect prey. These are huge. There's many, many families of these. Many different species attack all kinds of different insects. And because of that, they vary from huge to very, very tiny. And I have kind of the range here. So all of these things do the same basic life cycle. The adult female will find food for her offspring, and she will sting that food and lay eggs in it. The egg will hatch into a larva and eat the insect prey. It will pupate either in or on that prey and then emerge as an adult. So here we have one of the biggest parasitoids that we have in the area. This is called the giant ichneumon. The body of this is about 3 inches long, and with its ovipositor, which looks like a stinger, but it can't sting us, it's maybe 5 or 6 inches. The reason that it is so large is it actually attacks sawfly larvae in trees. And so here, this wasp is able to drill with this ovipositor through the bark and lay her eggs inside larvae that are feeding on this tree. So from that extreme down to tiny little parasitoids that attack aphids, here we have a female that's able to bend her abdomen underneath herself, and she's laying an egg inside this aphid. Her larvae will kill the aphid, and the aphid will become what's called an aphid mummy, which is a dead carcass of an aphid. And her larva is still in here, and when it comes to hatch, it will chew a hole in this mummy and emerge. Other evidence of parasitoids include their cocoons outside of prey. So in this case, some wasp species will lay several eggs inside one type of host. So here we have a caterpillar host, and it has tons of cocoons of parasitoids on it. So each one of these will hatch into an adult and go and look for other caterpillar prey. So how can we help? I left how can we help bees? So this section should say how can we help bees and others at home. So many of these recommendations are good for bees and for other beneficial insects. So all of the predators and parasitoids that I just talked about need food all season long. And that food is going to be both prey, but also pollen and nectar. They're not going to find prey every day. And so they also need carbs from sugar. They need protein from pollen. They need other resources as well. They need suitable locations to nest. They need water. And of course, they need protection from hazards like pesticides. And some of that is obvious. We know when we're putting 7 on plants that that's going to kill whatever touches it. But I think sometimes it's less obvious when you might be putting chemicals in a pond or in turf that could still have a negative impact. So be sure to read your labels if you do use any products, because many of these that homeowners have access to in stores, if they're not organic products or really specific, like some of the BT products, they can be broad spectrum and harmful. So probably the biggest question that everybody has when they're designing habitat for insects is, well, what plants? So there is no silver bullet here, which is a good thing because people with many types of aesthetics, budgets, sizes of habitats can support beneficial insects. But there are a few things that you should think about when designing your habitat. First of all, you want your food and shelter to be available all season. So you don't want to have a beautiful garden in June that then becomes a dead zone in the rest of the summer or vice versa. You want to have some things blooming throughout the season. You also don't want to clean up all the habitat at the end of the season. We'll talk about that. You want spring and fall blooming species. You want a lot of different colors and shapes of flowers. Most of the insects I talked about today, they don't have the specialized mouth parts that bees have where they can get down into a deep flower. They're going to need something with a pretty open flower so that they can land on it and feed. I think everybody should experiment with native plants. In my yard, I have both native and non-native plants, and it's amazing to me how many different types of insects I find in my native plants. Include both annual and perennial options. Perennials are great. Year after year, you're not having to reinvest, but annuals provide a ton of resource within a short time. So I think both are good things to include. The one thing you have to note with annuals is some of them, the hybrids, do not produce pollen and nectar, so they're not very attractive or beneficial. So for instance, in this hanging basket, this is a hybrid petunia, it really doesn't make any resources. So you don't have to just avoid it. I mean, it is a beautiful flower for humans. So one strategy is to just place that with other flowering foliage that does produce a lot of pollen and nectar, like an Alyssum or other species. So I mentioned native plants. So there are many types of ways that you can incorporate native plants. If you have a lot of space, you could make your own pocket prairie. You could seed with native plants. You could put a lot of different plants there. Many of these are really great bee plants, and I know a lot of you are very familiar with that from your work with Denise. Many of them are also visited by natural enemies. These plants are also rare, of course, so by adding them back to the landscape, we provide these plants back into the environment, and they are also important food. Their seeds are important food for birds and other wildlife. So they have many benefits. You don't need to have a ton of space to be able to include native plants. So I mentioned that my plants, this is from my house, I mentioned that this plant had kind of taken over. Most native gardens places will now carry native plants. So if you live in Columbus, for instance, Oakland Nursery has a wide variety, but many nurseries have native plants. So they are becoming a lot easier to get your hands on, which is great. They're also very tolerant of new gardeners. So despite having studied insects for many years, I'm actually new to the gardening world because I just bought a house last year. I lived in an apartment for a long time. So I'm pretty clueless, and I just kind of try stuff and see what works. So these are hard to kill, which to me is a great benefit of them. The one thing I will say if you're designing a native plant garden though is do pay attention to the height. So I didn't think that this would actually get as big. It's now probably 10 feet tall. And this is goldenrod, and we know that goldenrod itself is pretty big. So when you're designing your habitat, you may end up having to move some stuff around, which I had to do. But again, it's very tolerant, so it just kept going. Also, don't forget about flowering shrubs and trees. We tend to think about, perennial plants, herbaceous perennials, but flowering shrubs and trees are super important in spring. Think about when you're just getting out to the garden and your flowering trees are blooming, they're absolutely covered with bees and other insects. That's a time that resources are scarce in the urban environment. And so these can be important. And if you're looking at lists of different native plants to try, I really like Xerces Society. There are many different websites, but if you go to xerces.org, you can put in your zip code and it will bring up a listing of things to try for your area, and I find it to be very reputable. And when you go to that website, you'll see that they provide a ton of different options for the home gardener. So beneficial insects are not attracted to one kind of flower. They are attracted to many different plants. They're looking for resources, and if they can get pollen and nectar from it, and it has a good amount of protein and sugar, and it's what they're looking for, they'll be happy. So you can experiment with a lot of different heights, colors, shapes, and bloom periods to achieve habitat throughout the year. People ask, well, is it just native plants that support these predatory insects? No. I see a lot of predatory insects foraging and feeding from ornamental non-native plants as well. Some of them are very highly attractive. There's huge variation. So there's some really interesting studies where people have gone to garden centers and arboretums and sampled hundreds of species and saw, how many bees visited it, how many natural enemies did I find on it, and there's massive variation. So this is something where you really need to become the scientist in your own environment to see, of my plants, where do I see activity? Where do I find ladybugs feeding? Where are bees? What should I plant more of? What's less attractive? One good thing to start off with, though, is that if things are old-fashioned varieties, where you can see the stamen with the pollen and you can see the center of the flower, that is probably going to be more attractive to natural enemies because it means that the resources are very visible and accessible. In the horticultural industry, to produce big bang for your buck flowers, a lot of these varieties have been bred to double and triple. And when they do that, it reduces the resources that the plant produces to reproduce, so the pollen and nectar. And an example is here with these dahlias. So here in the back is a double dahlia, and this has really no attractivity at all to beneficial insects. But here in the foreground, and I blew that up here, you can see the pollen and nectar in the middle of this dahlia, and this one is very attractive. So when you're looking at options, think about this. Roses, you know, old-fashioned roses, very attractive. Roses like this, not attractive. Doesn't mean you can't include it. You know, they are very attractive to us, but mix it up with other ones if you're looking to create habitat. And examples that do this are roses, dahlias, and hollyhocks. You can also get doubles of, and the old-fashions. I have the old-fashions. I love old farm flowers. Tons of natural enemies, wasps, bees, all sorts of stuff on my hollyhocks. Another cool thing about plants is not only do they produce pollen and nectar in their flowers, they also produce it around their stems and other parts of the plant. This is specifically thought to have evolved to attract natural enemies. Natural enemies can find these resources and then they stay on the plant. So these are glands found outside of flowers. They can be anywhere really on the plant. This is a tiny wasp feeding on extra floral nectar at the stem of this vetch plant. Here's a picture of the underside of a catalpa leaf. This tiny little area is an extra floral nectary, so they're going to find sugar and resources there. There's a lot of plants of all sorts of different types that make extra floral nectar. Here are some examples of common landscaping plants. So some of our favorites like lilac and milkweed and peony and other things, viburnum, all sorts of your flowering cherries, your plums, all those plants produce extra floral nectarines. And peonies are probably the one that it really rang probably the most evident to me, because I remember being a kid and wondering why there were ants all over peonies. Well, it's because peonies on their plants make extra floral nectar. It's also why your peonies very rarely have holes in them, because the ants that feed on that nectar protect the peony from other insects. Some plants go so far as to make little cups for their extra floral nectaries, which I throw in here because it's super cute. Here are a ladybug and fly feeding from extra floral nectaries. In addition to all these perennials, there's a lot of annuals that you can put at different scales within the garden. These are all annuals that are recommended frequently to attract natural enemies specifically. That is really because these annuals work well in agriculture. So if you have a lot of land and you have a huge garden, these plants might work well for you to put in rows or strips within your garden. Some of you might have a small garden but might include herbs. Some of these herbs like coriander and dill, if you allow these to bolt, they're also very attractive to natural enemies. The one exception here that's more versatile, I'd say, is Alyssum. That's a good container hanging basket plant as well as a vegetable garden plant. So here are just what I was talking about. So some of these plants, this is supposed to be Alyssum in between rows. Alyssum is low. You can strip it in between rows of vegetable plants. Some of these plants like a borage or fava bean are taller. Those I would put at the edge of a larger garden as a beneficial insect strip. Buckwheat is a big spreader, but that's used in big cropping systems as a cover crop. So people will plant it in the fall, it blooms in the spring, and then they till it in. It's very, very attractive. It supports insects early in the season. So if you do living mulches and you have a huge vegetable garden, it could be a good thing to give a try to. But for those of us with tiny yards, these annuals can also work in containers, but I recommend different types of species. So we think about beneficial insect habitat as being an expensive, large endeavor, but it can be as simple as a single container. There are many annuals that you can purchase for not a lot of cost that are very attractive. If you're new to this and you're not sure, a lot of garden centers are getting good at putting out signs that say bee and butterfly plants. If it says bee and butterfly plants, it's also going to be attractive for other kinds of insects. It just means it produces a lot of pollen and nectar. Some of my favorites for attracting natural enemies specifically are listed here. Things that make really open flowers like zinnias, alyssum, cosmo, different types of mallows, sunflowers, all of these plants. I have a salvia that has a little bit of a deeper flower. It's a great bee plant as a container plant. Of all of these, I really like Lantana. It's extremely hard to kill. And if you have an extremely hot backyard or front yard, I use Lantana in a lot of my containers, and I've yet to have an issue with it. And I see hummingbirds, bees, and natural enemies feeding on it. So it's worked really well for me. But the important thing is for you to try different things and see what works out in your landscape. And of course, you know, people get crazy with containers. It's so much fun to try these plants in different combinations and see what works for you. We also need to rethink lawns. Lawns can provide a lot of habitat if we do not use chemicals on our lawns, but it requires us to rethink what a lawn can look like as a habitat versus a green desert. Many people might not want to see a lot of dandelions, but more and more the industry is coming out with some cool flowering lawns and less input no-mow lawn options that can be very beneficial. There's also important elements of the yard in terms of sheltering and overwintering. So we want these animals to be able to live in our yard season long. The big thing with sheltering overwintering, I think, is to provide diversity. So for some bee species, they might like open soil, where our natural enemies might like mulch or straw. And so if you have a variety of different elements on your soil, it's going to support the most diversity of species. Natural enemies also often will burrow into the soil or into mulch to overwinter. And so if we take all of that stuff away, all of the leaf material, all of the sticks, all of the pine needles, all of the stones, we clean up all of every container, we move everything inside, there's nothing left for them. So leaving some stone piles, some leaf material, some sticks and things like that in the environment, whether it's very organic, you know, or very ornate, it provides habitat just the same. For bees, I included some bee stuff in here too, just from a habitat management standpoint. There are also many houses that you can buy. People have probably tried these. These actually will be colonized by pollinators. You also will find some spiders and natural enemies opportunistically hanging out in these. Please do not kill those insects. They are also beneficial. And of course, we can do this at any size, from small containers to very large hotels, and beneficial insects of all stripes will colonize these hotels. Same with these, just to show another example. These are Bumblebee Hotels. These are not super effective usually at attracting bumblebees, but they're great wasp habitat if anyone's interested. Do not get pulled in by the cuteness of some things, though. These are supposed to attract ladybugs and butterflies, and I particularly like the butterfly one because it's showing that the butterfly will like perfectly put its wings and then walk in its little house and hang out in there. And I wish that happened because it would be really cute, but it doesn't happen. The only thing that will go in here are wasps, and so you can have a paper wasp house, but because they're cute, children might go up to them, and then, you know, that's not going to be good. Fruit feeders. Fruit feeders are great. If you haven't tried this, you should try it. You don't have to have a fancy apparatus. Just put a plate with some fruit and see what comes to it. Lots of butterflies will probably come to it. Wasps and ants and other things will come. The important thing with fruit feeders is first to change the fruit out often because it will ferment. And also not to get discouraged if you don't just have butterflies. I hear people all the time, oh, these wasps came to my fruit feeder. Yeah, because it's a big sugar source. So if you're putting it out there, it's got to be for everybody. It's not just going to be for butterflies. So put it in a place where you're going to be comfortable with that. And I just added this for today. I don't know if it's because I've been home more or because it's been so hot, but this summer I've really been noticing the importance of water. So of course, all insects need water, but we sometimes don't think it might be hard for them to find it in the environment when it's been really dry. And so adding water in some way in your home landscape is really important. And this summer, my big COVID-19 project was this little water garden. And I put some emerging rocks and things in here and emerging plants because I've noticed that insects, in addition to finding some predatory insects living in here, insects land on these and drink from the pond. I even moved some plants into my fountain because I noticed a lot of insects were trying to land and feed on water from my fountain and they were drowning. And the reason that this picture is here is my project this weekend is I realized that even with these different elements, I'm still having a lot of mortality. So I'm going to try putting some pebbles and stones within a very shallow dish. It's just a plant water base. And I'm going to fill that with water just enough so there's water in between the stones and see if I get some insects using that as a water source as well. And my last slide here is about releasing insects. So a lot of people ask me, should I be releasing insects? And my answer is save your money and invest in all the other things we talked about. You can buy natural enemies, but these could have diseases. You might be releasing something for a pest you don't have if you're not sure. They also could likely leave your environment and forage elsewhere. They could be in bad condition. It's sometimes hard to know if they're dead upon arrival. And at least one species, the convergent ladybug, which I have here, has become very rare in our environment locally. And these are sourced from California. They could be bringing in pathogens and things that our beetles do not have. So I really caution against releasing those. So thank you so much. That was a lot of information. I hope we have time for questions. Thank you to Denise and all of you who came to learn more about backyard natural enemies. I'm happy to answer the questions in the chat. Also, send me an email with your garden update or questions, and that's my email there if you want to copy that down. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Mary. Folks, I'm sure even if you have to hop off, I'm sure Mary would appreciate a thank you in the chat pod. And we did have a couple questions. Keith asked you, Mary, for aphid mummies, how long does it take to go from egg to adult?
So for aphids, a lot of times it can take, it depends on the wasp, I guess I should say. So there's some variability. I would say a week or two from egg stage to the wasp emerging is probably pretty standard. But one thing I use to gauge aphid populations, if I feel like an aphid population in my yard is getting out of control and I'm thinking about maybe using some hand removal of just like going through and removing the aphids, I'll look. And if I see a few dark aphids within the patch, it means that a few of them have been parasitized. There's a few mummies there. I won't mess with it because I know that within a few weeks, those wasps that will hatch will then attack the rest of the aphids.
Okay, great. You mentioned the flower wasps and that they're preying on the beetle larvae in the yard. How do they locate those?
I don't know for sure, but I think it's a scent-based thing that they can detect olfactory cues. That is my guess. I would need to look it up to be 100%.
Let's see, Marcia asks or comments about annuals and I guess other plants from nurseries to make sure they haven't been sprayed with systemics or other harmful insecticides. So maybe you want to make a comment, Mary, about that?
Oh my gosh, that's a great point and something I should have mentioned. So I've actually stopped. Sometimes it's very hard to know. And so I've actually started buying my annuals from a couple of greenhouses that grow their own annuals and don't use imidacloprid. If you purchase things from some of the big box stores, you know, that's fine, but you do need to be aware that they could have been treated with imidacloprid, which is a systemic insecticide. That insecticide will wear off. Eventually, it's not season-long control, but it could harm insects that feed on new transplants that you might make. So it's a good idea to do your research before you go. I kind of feel like it's a lot to ask for the people that work there to know every single plant and whether it's been treated, but usually a store will have a policy of either treating their seedlings or not. And so that can be a good way to inform yourself before you choose where to buy your plants. That's a great point.
Okay, Mary, someone says that they get a lot of eggs on their milkweed, I assume the monarch eggs, but they never grow bigger than being able to eat a small hole, and then they're getting eaten by something.
This is common. So it's very frustrating because we create all this habitat and it helps monarchs, but then it also attracts all sorts of insects, some of which eat monarchs. One thing, so last summer, for one, I find monarch habitat, it's very fickle. So last summer, I probably had seriously like 40 cocoons successfully emerge from my tiny yard. This year, goose egg, like nothing. So if this is your first year and you're not seeing any success, don't get too discouraged. If this is a perennial issue, I know a woman who actually takes very fine mesh and bags the very small larvae until they get to the 3rd or 4th instar, like pretty big caterpillars, to prevent against predation. So if it's really frustrating, that is something that will work. And paint mesh, paint strainer bags work well for this. So you can buy paint strainer bags in a big thing and pull them out, or just buy a few at the paint store. You have to take a twist tie, like from a garbage bag, to secure it on one end so other stuff doesn't get in there, but then you have the larvae in there and you can monitor. And when it gets pretty big, fewer things will attack larger larvae, and then you can take the paint strainer bag off.
Okay, thanks, Mary. There was a question about chiggers, and if you have any thoughts on chigger management.
I don't know a lot about management of chiggers. I haven't been bitten or infested by many things, but I'm lucky enough never to have had chiggers. So I've had fleas, lice bites, all sorts of terrible situations, but not that. So I don't, you know who would know just because he knows everything is the bug doc, Dave Shetler. If that person is familiar with the bug doc, or send me an email, I'll forward it to him. I swear he'll know. He knows how to deal with every insect situation.
Yeah. The final question is, where do orb spider babies overwinter?
They overwinter as egg masses. So at the end of the year, the large spiders will lay a round egg mass, and that egg mass will overwinter. And this is one of the things that we often lose when we clean up too much. So they'll often lay these on branches of plants. I found them, for instance, in my hosta plants. You know, so when you go to clip off the dead flowers and stuff, it's easy to remove them. So be aware of that when you're cleaning up, because they can be easy to miss. And then in the spring, those will hatch into baby spiderlings, and then you'll have the next generation. I will say you can move them. So you won't hurt them if you take the egg mass, if you need to remove some vegetation, and then you put it carefully in some leaves and things that you're going to overwinter. I've done that with mantid egg cases, and I've done it with spider egg cases, and I've looked and found the mantids and spiderlings the next year.
I think I'd have to have you in my garden to point out the spider egg masses. I'm okay with the mantid egg cases, but I don't have an eye for this.
They're in silk. So that's one easy way to tell. Like, it's always in silk, the egg case. But they can be different sizes for sure.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mary. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, spending the time with us to teach us all about these predatory insects and how to enhance our gardens. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. It's nice to see other people, even if it's remotely. And I hope that we can visit about gardening in person sometime soon.
Sometime soon.
Thanks, Denise.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.